oftentimes are the exacerbation of a mental health condition is not the depression or the anxiety. It's driven by just a life situation, right? So having young kids, parenting, loss, financial challenges, physical health conditions, social climate, natural disasters, those things. And when you have sort of a baseline struggle with your mental health, like those acute things really are like gasoline on a fire. So I would say that, as we look toward the future, it's really starting to weave and think about those things really intentionally together, and how sort of workplace well-being, organization for organization, draws the line in where they feel responsible for managing the well-being and can impact the well-being of their employees, and how they connect those dots together. We can't solve all the problems. We shouldn't expect solutions or vendors or programs to be able to solve all of those programs. But what is the right amount that we should solve and that we should impact?
Hello, and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast, where we explore how leaders in HR benefits and behavioral health are transforming workplace mental well-being. I'm your host, Stephen Sokoler, founder and CEO of Journey. Today, I'm joined by Erin Young, Director of Health, Equity, and Wellbeing at WTW. Erin has worked extensively with large employers as a clinical consultant, helping shape behavioral health and wellness strategies. She has a background as a clinical social worker and deep experience in large hospital systems and managed change settings. All right, how'd I do with that introduction?
I think it sounds great.
All right. How are you doing today, Erin?
I am great. I would say it's a beautiful day outside, and it's Friday, and I'm looking forward to the weekend with my kids. So I think that I'm doing pretty good.
I love that. And I'm right there with you. It is Friday afternoon, and excited to get outside and enjoy some of this nice weather before it disappears.
I know.
So let's hop in. So you've had a really dynamic career across clinical and corporate mental health. What originally drew you to this space?
I feel like it's maybe always not a clear answer, even to myself, because I look at where I've landed, and I don't know that when I started my career, I would have thought that this is where I would end up, or that social workers do this kind of work. But, originally I was going to be a lawyer, and I did terribly on the LSATs. And so I just married a lawyer instead, to make that easy. But I was forced with this decision of like, what do I want to do with my life? And I knew I wanted to do something in like the helping profession, and social work seemed like the right fit. I was also guided there by some, family members that were in healthcare. And, when I went to school, I think that we all go to school to be, I think a therapist. I think that's what, like, at least back like 20 some years ago, that's what everyone was sort of what you wanted to do. And it was a very clinical program at the University of Michigan. But I quickly found that large hospital, teaching hospitals was where I felt really comfortable. You're close to a lot of really interesting, like life-changing action. And you also got to see, that integrated element of mental health and how it really impacts everything. And I had the opportunity to work on trauma and burn units, and cardiac units and surgical units and medicine units. And when I ultimately landed on the addiction psychiatry team, it was this really interesting interplay of just how mental health is so impactful and impacted by so many different assets of like health and well-being. So I think that is what originally drew me there. And then I just was really lucky and fell backwards by a lot of, great circumstances into the role that I am here, guiding and helping large employers make decisions around their mental health benefits that impact broad populations. Whereas before I was doing a lot of individual and like one-on-one work. Now I get this great opportunity to do more population health impact and help employers just make decisions around the mental health and substance use needs of their employees.
I love that. Well, we'll have to have a separate episode about mental health for people who are married to lawyers. I come from a family of lawyers, but
yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So today's conversation is about the future of workplace well-being. And so just to ground the conversation, can you start by sharing where we currently stand?
Yeah. So I think the narrative for mental health, and this, and I think that many listeners will know this too, the narrative of mental health in the workplace has changed a lot over the really the last 10 years, that we've started having more discrete conversations about what mental health means, in the workplace. And the awareness building, I think, has been a significant area of growth, having people just talk about it in general, creating spaces where we can be open about what our needs are. And I think that that has been great. And I will say that there has been, over the course of the past couple of years that I've been at WTW, more of a conversation around taking mental health out of this sort of siloed approach. So we started talking about mental health more, but it still continued to sit in a little bit of a silo. And now we're starting to really thread that into more integration across different elements of well-being and what that looks like, and starting to be more intentional around how all of those things connect. But I still think that we're just a little bit infantile in that element. We have a lot of areas to grow. And when we think about broad workplace well-being and how mental health plays into that broader element and connecting those dots.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so now that we have that foundation, what does an ideal future look like?
I mean, I think it can look like a lot of different things. I think that we're on the right path to getting where we need to go. But I think that the ideal path in the future looks really, or the ideal future state is truly holistically connected. So, one of the things that I talk to our employers a lot about is that we confuse the concepts of mental health and mental illness, because I think we see a lot of mental illness and claims related information that's this very sort of tangible thing that we can hold on to. And that's indicative oftentimes of a ongoing acute or a chronic, mental illness condition that needs care and treatment. But really mental health is impacts the whole population, impacts everyone, impacts you, impacts me. And oftentimes the exacerbation of a mental health condition is not the depression or the anxiety. It's driven by just a life situation, right? So having young kids, parenting, loss, financial challenges, physical health conditions, social climate, natural disasters, those things. And when you have sort of a baseline struggle with your mental health, like those acute things really are like gasoline on a fire. So I would say that, as we look toward the future, it's really starting to weave and think about those things really intentionally together, and how sort of workplace well-being, organization for organization, draws the line in where they feel responsible for managing the well-being and can impact the well-being of their employees, and how they connect those dots together.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right with the mental health versus mental illness thing. I was at the Northeast Business Group on Health yesterday. They had a women's health conference, and I was actually the only male speaker there.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about how sleep or financial, worries can lead to anxiety, which can lead to depression, which can lead to, right. And it's not only mental illness as in I'm born this way, or I have schizophrenia, or this developed in me. It's also, like you said, life
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Yeah.
All right, so let's shift to the corporate world. What's a common misconception employers have about their existing mental health programs versus the reality of what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah. So I think a common misconception is that mental health programs can and will solve every problem for employees on the mental health side of things. And what we know is that the population of people who are struggling with more acute mental health conditions, it's really a bell curve, right? So we have some people who are on one end of that are light to moderate and might not need much. We have people that, like, a bigger chunk that float really in the middle of that, mild to moderate condition, that they can benefit from some things. Then we have people on the acute end of the spectrum too, that are likely going to be difficult to impact from just standard sort of mental health programming. And so talking to, clients, it's about like, okay, so realistically, what is the success point of how many people we touch and how we touch them, right? And we can't solve all the problems. We shouldn't expect solutions or vendors or programs to be able to solve all of those programs. But what is the right amount that we should solve and that we should impact? So I would say that that's one of the big things. Maybe I would call it just like a misaligned, expectation or expectation management on like realistically what can happen in the space of mental health and mental health care.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Mhm.
So let's talk about moving from reactive to proactive. So as you know, historically, mental health benefits have been reactive, right? Somebody
Mhm.
has a problem, and that's when we're treating it, right? Kind of similar to your earlier point about mental health versus mental illness. And as someone who's worked on the clinical side and seen firsthand, what are the moves companies can make to be more proactive, to not simply
Mhm.
wait until there's an issue?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the things is like thinking about sort of the organizational approach to what is underpinning and supporting the population, and that's everyone from employees to managers and leaders, and especially some of the people in the C-suite too. So I think there we're looking at just broad awareness building, um, sharing education and facts that are accurate, right? And not spreading sort of misinformation and false understanding of what mental health looks like in the workplace, but also starting to establish what and define what a resilient workforce looks like. And I think that, it's sort of assumed that we are all resilient at some level. Like, we say this about kids, right? Like kids are resilient. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're resilient, but we also have to teach them how to
Hmm.
be resilient. So they're physically resilient if they like fall down and bump, skin their knee, but emotionally resistant or resilient, we have to be able to teach them what that looks like and how to cope with whether it's change or, transformation or things like a reduction in force or high periods of stress and busyness, within the organization. And so starting to upskill on what resilience looks like individually and as a team, because people who are resilient and are able to demonstrate that resiliency are able to come back and bounce back from other challenges easier and more readily. And so I think that proactive approach to offering that, is really, really critical and trying to get ahead of the problems before it starts. And then, you know, being in front of your employees about the importance and the need, I think is another one. So like that active communication, here's what's available. Here's how we expect to use it, right? This is how you can use it. This is how we carve out time for you to, use your benefits. We have an ERG that's doing, or a BRG that's, doing this session, and helping people understand, what's available, how to access it, and how to, you know, start to reach into those resources before there's a real fire happening and before that smoldering issue or that small problem becomes a really big, like hot fire.
Yeah, yeah. I think we have a larger societal problem where, when it comes to physical health, we understand that we're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. Whether we do or not's a different thing, right?
Mhm.
We're supposed to drink a certain amount of water. We're supposed to take a certain number of steps. We're supposed to dot dot dot, right? But when it comes to mental health, we don't really have that protocol or that recipe to say, hey, if you
Mhm.
meditate, journal, be with nature, be with friends, pray, XYZ, whatever it is, that will help to keep you mentally and emotionally well so that you don't slip. And of course, to your point earlier, like life is going to happen, whether it's
Mhm.
kids or work or wars in the outside world or what have you, right? We know those things
Mhm.
are going to happen. So how do you build up that resilience, that armor, so that when they
Mhm.
do, the impact isn't as strong?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough nut to crack, right? I mean, this is what we talk to employers about really all the time, and you bring up a good example, and this is something that I've said to many of our clients in other forums. But one of the challenges that we have is that there's a lot of physical health conditions that we've been grabbing data on for a really long time. So while every person's experience with diabetes or a musculoskeletal condition or a cardiac condition is a unique experience and slightly different, we have a lot of really good like metadata that tells us that this is what that journey will likely look like. And with the interventions at certain different points, this is what we can expect. Whereas with mental health, we lack that homogeneity, right? It's really heterogeneous. So your stress reaction and my stress reaction can be wildly different. And the same thing with our experience with anxiety or depression, but also being able to pull back and understand, like, am I anxious about a presentation, or do I have anxiety at my baseline, right? And being able to pull back and understand how situational issues impact, mental health, but also how we're all different, and being able to bring all that together is really challenging. And there's no simple solution for that.
For sure, for sure. All right, what is one overlooked or underutilized benefit that companies should be offering right now? Or to say it differently, what's a benefit that companies perhaps are offering but aren't getting the value from? And feel free to take that whichever way you want.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in general, I think the very common one right now that we're seeing is employee assistance programs. Like, everyone offers it, but it generally has little utilization. Um, but also, the reaction from the pandemic, that when the pandemic happened, we had many clients just that put in a lot of point solutions, just as an effort to doing something is better than nothing, can't hurt, might help. But at the same time, there has to be a business case for having that sit in the ecosystem. And many of those things have been underutilized. And some of the challenges there is that mental health still feels to many people like it is an opt-in, right? Like, you have to raise your hand, whereas, like, we send our kids to their standard pediatrician appointments every a certain amount of time, and we go to our annual physical, and women get their mammogram at a certain point, and like, all those different things we just have this understanding of. Whereas for mental health, it feels like this real, like, you have to raise your hand. And I don't want to call it a barrier to entry, but you have to really be intentional about seeking out those services. And so we find the same with a lot of those solutions that are kind of floating there in employer ecosystems, that you have to figure out how to decrease the barriers and make it easy and understandable to access. And so in general, I think that there's a lot of, like, that general sort of underutilization. But, like, what we're seeing in a lot of the data now is that you employers also need to be really intentional about what some of those other drivers of stress and anxiety are, and how they can drive to those resources too. So, like, financial well-being, backup childcare support, some of the social platform and peer support platforms that might be available to employees, that drive some of those other elements of well-being, but might not be, like, specifically, like, mental health related, but what I like to call is, like, mental health adjacent, because it still impacts mental health on the back end.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the challenges with EAPs, but in general, is that oftentimes the culture doesn't support mental health, and so you can put out the
Mhm.
best benefits in the world, you can add every single thing, but then if you have way too much work, to our conversation before we
Mhm.
start, recording, or your managers don't know what to look for, or don't know how to support you, or there isn't permission, right? Like, I think we'd
Mhm.
all, if somebody came in with a broken arm, we would ask them
Yeah.
about it. We would expect, they wouldn't feel a stigma to say, "Hey, my arm is broken." Whereas if you were suffering from anxiety or depression or this or that, there's just a different, and some companies do this really well, but
Mhm.
most companies don't, right? Like, how do we embed mental health into the fabric of the organization?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I've had clients that have said that too, that we have these really robust strategic conversations about building out mental health. And there's a lot of very good people that sit in these organizations and have the buy-in and want to do what is right by their employees. But then at the end of the day, they say exactly that, which is, this is great. We believe it. You don't have to sell us on it. But at our top brass,
Hmm.
that is not the culture of our organization. You know, we feed on productivity, overworking, not using vacation time, like, pushing through sickness and, like, coming to meetings, which is counterintuitive to all that other stuff that we're trying to manage with, like, stress and well-being and mental health. And so there is a very significant organizational and culture play here that needs to be balanced, right? We want to support mental health. We want to have an aware organization. We also have to make the widgets, right? We also have to do our job. So we can't, you know, have everyone have, 100 mental health days every year. And so that is tricky to find that balance of what makes sense for an organization. and how they're going to support the mental health of their employees.
Yeah. So what can leaders do to create a workplace where people feel safe talking about mental health?
Yeah, this is, another thing that we're talking about quite a lot. I think that this concept of psychological safety, which has been around for a long time, but is starting to get a little bit more attention in the space of like creating a psychologically safe workplace. Leaders need to think about like what that means from a broad perspective, and what people feeling safe to speak up to their leaders, to challenge maybe the status quo, respectfully challenge the status quo without feeling like there's going to be some level of retaliation or retribution for that, and being able to speak up when they have needs. And that could be a very tactical sort of, I am struggling and I am burned out right now with this project and I need a little bit more time on that. It also could be like if you're struggling and you have a workforce that skews heavily to neurodivergence, and like people need some level of reasonable, support or a different working environment or an accommodation to get those needs met. They need to feel comfortable, speaking up for those needs. And that's really a top down. Like you need to have not just, the framework, but you have to have the leadership buy-in. We've seen with organizations, like those leaders that really lean in, and I mean like C-suite level CEO, that like lean in and have that really authentic, altruistic approach of, this is how we approach this here. This is my personal experience with mental health. This is why it's important to me. Maybe they have a loved one or a family member. I will say that, not to go off on a huge tangent, but those are the leaders that we see that have been directly impacted, either themselves or a loved one or a close, maybe family member that has had a mental health experience or struggled with the mental health system. Those are the leaders that we see that have that true like drive for this, to make this better and to like really disseminate that message through the organization. And then, establishing what the like foundation minimum standards are of, we expect leaders to be empathetic, maybe is one of those things. How do you be empathetic? Some people need to be taught how to be empathetic. It's not just a natural, some of us just are not like always warm and fuzzy, but it's also like asking the right questions, but it's also setting managers and leaders up for success, because nothing is worse than, I'm sure we've all experienced this, but like when you go into your PCP's office and you're like filling out that questionnaire, they have like the standard PHQ-2 now for some of those like light depression screening indicators, which if you trigger, they should give you the PHQ-9. But I always get the sense in like our PCP offices that they're just like crossing their fingers and like praying you don't screen positive, because they don't know what to do then or how to get you to the right resources. So the same holds true if you're going to have leaders inquire like, hey, Erin, you look a little bit down today. You seemed a little bit stressed. You've just been, not responding in the way that we know you to respond. What's going on? And I open up and I tell you about what my needs are, about what is going on. We need our leaders not to panic, and we need them to be able to go to the right spot, just to point to the resource, not to solve the problem, not to be the fix it, but like help get to the resources if those resources are appropriate. But also sometimes just having a leader that cares, like just baseline cares, and asks the right questions so an employee knows that they're being heard, even if there's no solution. Like for example, like maybe their pet died, like my pets, we love our pet, she's part of the family. It was really, when we lost our last dog, it was really impactful. I don't expect my workplace to do anything about that, but it made me feel good when my people leader was like, I have a dog and I know what that's like, and that's really, really sad. So things like that are just, they make a significant difference on your employees, their engagement, their satisfaction with their job, that team dynamic that is within your organization, that is what is ultimately sort of like making those widgets. And then going back to your original conversation, the original question, so I don't like lose like track of that, but like it starts at the leadership position of like really permeating that message through and making sure that the tools and the action items are there, and like those call to actions are available for those team members.
Yeah. One of the questions that I was asked yesterday on the panel at NEBGH was about one thing I'd like to see change, or one thing that companies could do. And I spoke about mental health first aid. So you may know this, that I can't recall if you and I ever spoke about this, but Lululemon did mental health first aid. And they said, this is great. We want to roll this out for all 20,000 of our employees, but we need something that's more modern, diverse, inclusive, that's taught not in an 8-hour session, but in a way that's more digestible. And so
Yep.
they came, this is a longtime partner. We built this customized program. We've rolled it out now all over the world, in Mandarin and China and French and Canada. And now we've done it for Pfizer and Regeneron and a bunch of other companies. And it's all about exactly what you said. It basically starts with, so it's 4 parts. One, how do you take care of yourself? How do we direct people, exactly as you said, to the right resources? So not, I'm going to play armchair psychologist because I took this 4-hour course or this 6-hour course. And with that, I think that's one of the ways that we can start to shift the culture, where managers feel more prepared, where employees feel better, kind of like swimming with a lifeguard on duty. I think we all feel better knowing that other people around us can support us if we end up slipping, or if, sometimes, I mean, you can speak to this better than I do. You might be going down a path and you're not even aware of the fact that you're struggling that much until you get there and you're like, oh, wow, I'm really low right now. So having other people around you who maybe they notice the background of your house seems messier, or maybe they see that you're not, showered the way you used to, or you're showing up to work late, or what have you. So I think that's one of the biggest things that companies can do to help managers and shift the. All right. Let's talk about the future of workplace well-being. So not all employees have equal access to digital mental health resources due to income, geography, cultural factors, and more. How can companies design benefits that ensure inclusivity?
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Mhm. So it's a great question. We all have different sort of tech enablement. We live in different areas, and largely, and you know this, but for those listening, that you need from a just basic mental health care treatment expectation, things like your medical benefits, your EAP solution, and then overlaying what that access looks like. And access can look like in person, it can look like telehealth, it can look like digital self-guided care, it can look like evidence-based webinars or group sessions that are run. It could be, any number of different sort of elements that people can ingest in the way that they need. I think that cultural relevance is critically important, and I think that here in the United States we speak English, but for many people English is not a native first language. And so having availability in different languages, of the most common ones, like Spanish being a common one, but we have very big populations of Haitian Creole and other groups that are here that need that specific language element. And being able to see that and take that in is important, also because mental health is approached very differently in different cultures too, and how it is phrased or framed up, and some of the things that may not be second nature, or I might not understand, being a native English speaker, what that means. So those are some of the core components that we look at. But then we look at, sort of the next level up. When you look at that acuity spectrum, everything from healthy to, acute needs, do you have what you need there? Are there gaps that are noticeable? And do we need, based on what as the employer, what your population does? So like maybe they have a high tech digital adoption. Is there an opportunity to build out an area of this spectrum of mental health care that could be more robust and impactful for that group? So those are some of the things that we do. I mean, this is a really complex area. It can get very, very weedy, but at a high level, that how I help some of our clients think about that.
Cool. And another one that doesn't have an easy answer. So there's growing attention on aligning well-being efforts across departments and vendors and different countries and regions. How can companies ensure their strategy feels cohesive and not fragmented?
Yeah. So I always go back to sort of a general strategy and having a broad organizational mental health strategy. When you think about a strategy, you're talking about a framework and principles that guide how you are thinking about mental health. And that's putting some of the flags in the sand around what you think you can do and want to do versus what you know is out of your control. So one of the things I say a lot is it is very within your control to be able to like add more, like vendor point solutions or things like that to your ecosystem. It is largely outside of your control to think that you are going to add more like psychiatric beds to the behavioral health system, right? And so we have to think about, where it is that you have that impact. But when you start off with that framework, you can set those principles, you can set those guideposts, and then you can push that out with the understanding that there needs to be localization to every piece of that. And that localization, when we think about that, it's definitely global, right? So like the APAC and EMEA regions need something different than South America. But even within those countries, you need to segment and localize those action points, right? So that could be down to business unit. That could be down to salary bands. That could be down to, genders or ages of how you're targeting, and creating benefits that work for the population. So I always think it's also nice to do that because you can feel like when you establish that framework and that rubric against which you look at those action items and decide to put things into place, it doesn't feel like you're always recreating the wheel every time something new comes in. You can say, should we think about this? This hits X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't hit A, B, C. So we can't, that's not within what we should be doing and where we should be spending our time. And so there's an efficiency element of being able to, set that strategy. Takes the effort at the beginning, but like downstream is designed to like make things easier and, promulgate sort of how you're approaching mental health across the organization.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, what we're seeing on our side is we have a lot of clients, to your point earlier, that added a ton of things during the pandemic and added a lot of things in the US, but not so much globally. And so they're looking to harmonize their benefits, have something that's consistent, but also relevant, right? Not taking a US lens and putting it in Saudi Arabia or Russia or South Africa. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So finding that balance, and it just takes time, right? It's not easy. It's not an easy thing, which is why it's hard for a lot of companies when HR is under resourced and under budgeted. All right, last question. So from your experience, if we fast forward 5 or 10 years, what does an ideal, well-balanced mental health strategy look like for employers?
I think that it looks like it starts with a mental health strategy that is linked up and closely tied to a broader well-being strategy that doesn't silo, because we don't want to continue to silo mental health, but really is intentionally integrated with physical health, general well-being, financial well-being, and social well-being. And so that's where I see things like being the most successful, right there and well balanced. And from there, I think it's understanding better integration points from real experiences with our employees. And so many times we hear this from an organizational perspective that like decisions are made at the top that impact those people that are doing the work at the bottom, but they don't actually have a great understanding of the realistic like execution of what that looks like, right? And so with that, it's just making sure that those benefits are aligned, taking those real employee journeys and needs and making sure that people have what they need, right? So it's like, it's not just because you provide like an education benefit. That's great if someone's going to night school, but they have kids, like who's going to watch their kids if they go to night school, right? So like you have to think about where all of those intersection points come across and making sure that those gaps are reasonably covered. And then I think it's starting with like, it's building that organizational foundation too of how are we creating a resilient workforce? What does a resilient workforce mean for our organization? And how are we preparing everybody to talk about mental health here from standard employees with each other, but also our leaders and our supervisors, and making sure that we are supporting people, getting people to the right place at the right time, as opposed to letting things, percolate and exacerbate to a point of crisis. So ideally, I'd love to see those crisis elements come down and people engaging earlier at the points that are important and impactful for them in the ways that they can consume that information.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. And that feels like a great place to end. Erin, you're awesome. Thank you for your time, for sharing your wisdom, for doing the work that you do. Any final words or thoughts before we wrap?
No, I think that this was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you. For everybody listening, this is the Mental Health Advantage podcast. If you like this, feel free to follow or share it with a friend, and have a beautiful day.